Hello and welcome. So spontaneously recording today. Quite often there's almost a hint of joy or clarity before recording, or this is what usually brings into thought to record. But today's session was more so that it's a Friday, and usually when there are episodes to be released, it's done on a Friday, and I was aware I didn't record last week. I thought it would be good for me, even though there are difficulties at the moment. I thought it would be good to record and to have some continuity. There seems to be that balance within me in regards to taking care of oneself and having continuity, some routine and consistency, and find it's another sort of checking in with that and seeing what the balance is. But there was enough of whatever inside of me to record and to be here. So for this last week, and especially for the last few days, there's been a huge amount of cloudiness in the mind. Almost like a storm, but not so much in regards to anxiety. I've used that metaphor before of a storm, and either there's maybe panic or in this case there's almost a density to the mind. And so it's been very hard to the right way to word this. And I guess in a sense it's covered up presence. At times the mind has been sort of racing with thought, but throughout the few days or the week there's always been some rays coming through those clouds of awareness, even the awareness of the difficulties. There may not be the qualities of awareness experience in regards to a lightness or a deep spaciousness, but there has been the awareness of perhaps not being aware, or those qualities of not being present. Sometimes there's the question that comes, what to do? And there doesn't need to be an answer to that. And there's also been a thought of, well, why should it be any different? Okay, right now there's a great deal of mind activity. There's suffering there as well, when imbued and pursuing and following identifying with the mind, the thoughts, the emotions. it all perpetuates more thought. For example, like it could be identified with the mind for hours, and then a slight glimpse of presence comes in. Oh, why can't I be present? Is the thought. And so that slight gap between the thoughts is maybe even a split second, less than that perhaps, and then follows the thought, why can't I be present? Why am I going backwards? There's a deeper sense as well of perhaps maybe this is almost a natural cycle of mind. Where perhaps I'm not going backwards, perhaps this is just maybe the mind is more under threat, it's struggling more. Maybe there's a deeper layer of mind that's now coming to the surface, and perhaps without looking deeply it can seem as if things are getting worse, as if I'm getting less present or losing myself more in mind. There was a moment in the shower this morning where I was aware, or there was some awareness of the thoughts pulling me this way and that way, and me following the thoughts and then trying to come out of them, and there was a moment of just I amness, the I am. It's a common pointer. Of course this can be expanded on in different ways, but for me it was just a raw recognition of I'm here, and that's all I could manage before I get swept away again by thought. Because what it felt like was that presence isn't working right now, I can't be present, okay, but for even a small time there's a recognition of there's somebody here. That's not thought. There's an energy here, there's a source here that's not thought, that's not feelings. That's aware of the thoughts and feelings. And that could be translated into I am. So I feel it's important for me not to create a story out of this, like a chronological record that I'm holding in my mind. And just working with what's here. For example, I haven't been sleeping well recently, and I'm aware that has a great effect on the mind. Perhaps the mind is becoming very restless, it's becoming whatever mental conditions there are, the condition of the mind, whatever trauma it's gone through, suffering, and it's now almost being squeezed with the lack of sleep. Well, perhaps it's okay for the mind to be the way it is right now. Perhaps it's perfectly reasonable in regards to my mental health symptoms over the years, the lack of sleep. So not to say this is the only reason, but perhaps lack of sleep is a simple recognition of what's going on right now. sometimes we can create a huge complicated mental structure of what's going on and pulling in things from the past and creating this so I use the word beautiful because sometimes what our mind constructs can be in some way in the elaborate story that we can weave. But on another level, it's, well, maybe I haven't just been sleeping well. Okay. Then it doesn't feel as if it's a problem. Perhaps now there's clarity on, okay, what can I do to improve sleep? Is there something I'm doing that's perhaps not so good for my sleep? Okay, I'm not being present throughout the day. Is it time to watch maybe a spiritual video, a meditation, to get some help? I talked about in the past of relying on perhaps spiritual books or videos too much, where we're almost perhaps watching it unconsciously, watching it again and then wanting another one, instead of actually going there and being that what has been pointed to. But now perhaps there's a need for that. And often when sitting in presence or conscious sitting, perhaps presence, you're fluctuating in and out of presence, but it just increases the clarity, even if they're even very slightly, subtly. Even if the waters are muddied, everything's. For example, this morning, the mind was feeling very confused. I didn't know how to plan my day. There was things that need to be done, and I was thinking, okay, how do I organise food for today? What do I need? Do I need to eat breakfast? What am I going to do for lunch when I'm out? And it just wasn't computing. So before recording this, I thought, okay, what can I do? Well, perhaps a green tea would help. There's a little bit of caffeine in green tea. Perhaps it's good for the body in the morning to have something such as this. And perhaps I can just sit. And there was a thought early in the week when similar symptoms were experienced where I thought, okay, perhaps can I sense the edge of what I'm looking for? Perhaps I can't go directly there, perhaps it's too much for the mind. So for example, sitting here this morning thinking about food, it was too much to organise meals for today. Okay, and then I thought, okay, can I sense just what's the edge of this situation I need help with? Okay, it's food. Okay, am I hungry now? Well, no. Okay, that's one thing. Then there's a question of, okay, do I want to bring food with me when I go out? Should I pack something before? And there was a little bit of confusion there. Perhaps there was the mind sort of evaluating that, the effort. Do I have the food to take with me? But just approaching it very subtly, not having to know the answer in its totality, just, okay, if I take a very small piece of whatever I'm thinking about or need to think about and plan? Can I just get a bit of clarity on that? And then going from there. But that's not a working out from the mind. It's almost a natural action from presence. Presence is aware of the condition of the mind. It's okay. It tries to work with it. There's no sort of forcing of getting the mind up and running, forcing the mind to think and contort itself to work out the specific answer. Presence works around it. So for instance, I couldn't go into the center of the thought or situation I wanted to, such as arranging my food on another day. Perhaps immediately there would be 3 meals would appear. And I think, okay, that's done. I've got that planned. But today that's not possible, so it's working almost on the edge of that, working around it. Gradually finding whatever space there is to work with. It's done through, almost done through the opposite of effort, especially mental effort. Perhaps you can add a little bit of effort in regards to just being aware. But again, this is a different type of energy that's being put into it. And perhaps overall today, there can just be almost that consultation with presence, with activities, sort of being swept away with mind activity. And of course, there may not be a choice, you may be done, but in the glimpses of awareness, these can be utilized. For example, now there's a certain amount of awareness as I'm recording, and there's a bit more clarity about perhaps how I can look after myself today, take care of the mind. Such as when I do go out, perhaps the music I listen to or whatever I listen to, it can be more in alignment with presence. Perhaps there's some frequency music, meditation music that may support me more today. Perhaps with the awareness of mind, there can be, maybe there's more of a choice of what needs to be done and what can be left for another day. Because quite often when we have a list, at least for me, when I have a list in my mind, there's almost a bit of a obsession to complete that list today. It's okay, this is what I wanted to do today, and if I was to sort of pause and check in with the mind, to feel like, am I putting my mind through more suffering, more difficulty? And again, with presence, it almost illuminates the subtleties of how we're feeling. In regards to mind, which is very dense and it's much more focused on what it wants to achieve versus, is the body in pain right now? Is the mind in pain? Is it being unnecessarily strained with whatever you're trying to think about? Of course, we notice it more physically. If there was, for example, a huge physical pain walking, then you would a lot less likely to walk, or you would adjust how you walk or get some help. But with mental pains, without awareness, quite often we just sort of go through it. We continue the mental difficulties, and maybe there's consequences to that. We're going to move on to the Karma book in a moment. And perhaps there's mental consequences to those strains of the mind, but quite often covered up by the unconscious thinking. Even mental pain. That's how the dense identity to mind can be, the thoughts of mind. And there's a sense of not pulling one way or the other with this sort of mental density. I can feel it now, it's pulling me sort of out of awareness. There's a sense of sort of not having a preference, not perhaps wanting it to not be here. Just thinking of the words of, it goes back to craving and aversion, so not sort of wanting it to be here, but not also wanting it not to be here. It's just simply here. Because as soon as you add the wanting to it, you're almost off balance in some ways. You're adding an extra ingredient to what is already here, which is another thing to deal with, instead of just allowing it to be in the space of now. And again, to the mind, this seems insane. The mind's like, of course you're going to be in suffering. You're not doing anything. It doesn't see just being aware and alert. It doesn't see that as an activity, a doing. It doesn't recognize and understand the qualities and the healing that takes place in the not doing. And of course, action comes from the not doingness. But again, this is all not recognized or seen by the mind. Okay, so we're on a chapter of volition, choice and will. So let's return to there. So this section is titled Seeds of Volition. So what determines human volition? Why do some people operate out of a greater sense of inclusiveness and others out of a greater sense of exclusiveness? Look at this closely. You will see that volition is shaped fundamentally by your belief that you are a separate being, an individual. In other words, it is your identification with your individuality that determines your volition. The operative word here is identification. If you were not identified with this sense of separateness, you would not be accumulating karma. If your identification were all-inclusive, that would be the end of the karmic cycle. Unfortunately, people's identification with narrow notions of individuality make them engage with the world selectively rather than inclusively. The endless oscillation between like and dislike, attraction and aversion, further hardens their sense of separateness. Over time, likes and dislikes freeze into a personality and produce more karma. Individuality now becomes a prison rather than a privilege. Try and pronounce this name. Gautama, the Buddhist teachings on this subject, his emphasis on desirelessness, in particular, have unfortunately been misinterpreted and mutilated by many. Now, this was an incredibly perceptive man who would have known only too well that without desire there can be no existence. What he was pointing to was the importance of operating out of a state of inner fulfillment rather than inner hankering. Once this is accomplished, your life becomes an expression of bliss, not a pursuit of it. Your desire does not evaporate. Instead, it becomes conscious. Your desire is no longer the unconscious fuel for your personal identity. It is the conscious tool by which you function. So just a pause here as we absorb what is being said. So the notion of desire. So now it's no longer an unconscious desire, where unconscious desire, of course, creates that separation, that individuality, that aversion and craving. But desires within coming up in the wholeness, in the inclusiveness of presence where there's no separation, then it's, as it's saying here, no longer the unconscious fuel for your personal identity. And you can almost sense the sharpness of a personal desire. You can sense it in the body and the mind. The thoughts are wrapped around that desire, versus a desire just sort of coming to the surface and it's there, okay, that's what's needed, that's what's wanted. And there's a sense of wholeness to it, versus the personal desire of sharp edges and an acuteness to it. And there's almost a sense of personal desire when it's trying to grasp at something. There's a tightness to it. Maybe there's fear in that as well. Oh, I must get this, otherwise there's going to be a huge amount of pain. That's what is being said underneath that desire. Versus a desire from the inclusiveness where there's no attachment to that desire. It can either happen or not happen. You're not looking for, as it's saying here, you're not looking for the pursuit of bliss from that desire. And it's saying, once this is accomplished, once you are sort of living your life out of that inner fulfillment, so you are already operating from that wholeness, that presence of that, there's almost nothing needed to be added to that. Your life becomes an expression of bliss, not a pursuit of it. So the bliss is already here. Nothing externally is going to ultimately add to that natural bliss of who we are. Things can be enjoyed, yes, but you are not. Nothing can add to who you are. And of course, we reverse that is when we're identified with mind, we're constantly pulling things, achieving things, wanting things to add to who we are. Perhaps in Eckhart's New Earth, he talks about me and my car, the type of car it is. I've got this fancy model car, and that's added to my identity. I feel blissful now because of the car. Of course, it's not true bliss, it's perhaps happiness, temporary happiness that will naturally come to an end, and that will sort of dissolve into pain when maybe that car, let's say a lorry hits that car and it's written off, and the car is no longer there, and there's going to be a deep pain because part of your identity was with that car, me and this car. And so you can almost see the root. If karma was almost the flowers of the tree, the fruit of the tree, and the root of it that comes, depending on what fruit is grown, is the energy that it's come from, the source of that. So from the wholeness of now, actions coming from there, as it's saying here, it result in no karma, versus the desires and acted upon actions from the individual, the separateness, the little me. And you can already sense the taut, tense, fearful energy and of course there's going to be a consequence to that energy coming back. And to read this line again, the endless oscillation between like and dislike, attraction and aversion, further hardens their sense of separateness. So again, it is the mind. The more it identifies, the more it is active, the more it can feed, it can become more. It's the ego. The more likes and dislikes it collects, and the more it deepens in those likes and dislikes. Quite often, when we're here in the world, we have obviously this visor of me, and everything is filtered through the me-ness, the mind, and it's constantly creating a deeper groove of likes and dislikes, and so instead of moving fluidly through the world in a very transparent, very light, transparent way, where things are flowing through you and thoughts are arising and then moving through you, emotions are coming up and then dissolving. Instead, everything is coming up and it's hardening into something that we carry with us. the mental structure of me, it's adding more to that structure. And again, it's perpetuating itself even more. As more things come, more things hit it that you like and don't like, it adds another layer to it. When you are no longer identified with your desire, when there is a distance between you and your mind, you simply learn to play with desire. The desires are no longer about you anymore. Now your karmic bondage vanishes entirely. How can one disidentify with desire? How can there be desire without individuality, intention without identity? The logic is simple. Individuality is a myth. It is an idea, not an existential reality. We have fragmented our world out of ignorance. So again, boiling this down to this present moment. Am I aware of this moment? And again, in this moment when you are present, there's no me in this moment. There's no me and presence, me and awareness. There's just awareness. Awareness can't fragment itself. It is all. I think it's Mooji that uses the example of, I'm using it correctly, of like a knife cutting things in half, but it can't cut itself. It can't. He uses many examples in a very very clear way. But so your body already knows that it is part of a great molecular dance of the cosmos. It knows that it will not survive for a moment without transacting with air, water, sunlight, and earth. Your mind, however, believes otherwise. It is convinced it is a limited entity. Therefore, any volition based on this limited understanding goes against the fundamental design of the source of creation. It almost makes perfect sense to something so limited and narrow to act from that in regards to what's needed in the wholeness of now. it's so disconnected and out of touch. It's probably not a great example, but it's almost as if not being aware of the weather outside and just putting on whatever you think it might be. So it's using awareness and presence to sense, okay, in the one reality, what is needed. And perhaps you can sense use the metaphor of the ocean, the changeable waves, the chaos at the top of thoughts and mind, desires, oscillation, and then there's the depth of stillness, of wholeness there are no individual waves down there. Of course, there's the expression on the surface of the waves and the mind saying, oh, that's me and that's you. And of course, it's now being aware of the myth that the temporary wave from the ocean is separate from the ocean. It's where all of this karmic accumulation, all of this continues, and how it can be dissolved. And again, I'm speaking for myself here, this can seem a lot to absorb. There may be a thought of, maybe a thought of fear that as soon as how can I possibly sort of always act out of presence, or always, no, it's just taking care of this moment. And right now, as you listen, you may well be very present and okay. And there's going to be a time when that's going to be covered up. Actions may happen from there. And of course, they're not necessarily negative, but consequences. Perhaps things to be resolved from that. It may not be in a big way, who knows? It could be in a very subtle way where things are resolved and aligned with. So again, it's showing almost the importance of, perhaps importance isn't the right word, but it's just perhaps it's just showing the reality of things. We can either act unconsciously, go through that, and then deal with the consequences of that. Perhaps there's deep suffering there. The oscillation itself is a suffering of like and dislike, and of course we're so blinded by that taste, by that, so unaware of that. But in awareness, this is all seen, and you can almost know that this doesn't taste good, that the like and dislike, being in that oscillation, you can see the heaviness of that, the pain and suffering of that. So perhaps sort of sometimes the mind may focus on the fearful side of things. Okay, what about all of the things I did yesterday? I wasn't aware. Perhaps the way I see this and the way it's being written is as a support to continually come back to the now. Place of stability, place of joy, the joy that can't be. That, so to say, can't be covered up, but that's not what I mean. I guess that joy that's ever present. So it's always there. So it's gently moving into the way we handle each moment from that place of inclusiveness. And you can almost allow it to draw you into inclusiveness. There's no mental effort, okay, I must stay present. No, it's you're there already. You are that. So you're gently letting go of mind, me and mind. As soon as it comes up, step back into alertness. And I use the word invite because it's not a case of that sort of sharp effort which can, if it's done out of separateness, that this me needs to be present, then again it's creating more to be cleared up. So we'll end this episode with operating out of a state of inner fulfillment rather than inner hankering. Once this is accomplished, your life becomes an expression of bliss, not a pursuit of it. Your desire is no longer the unconscious fuel for your personal identity. It is the conscious tool by which you function. You will now desire the well-being of the entire planet. Thank you for joining me for this episode. I wish you well, and I'll see you again very soon. Take care.